Hello, and welcome back to another edition of Tech in 10, the Louisiana Tech Bulldogs postgame show from the Ruston Daily Leader. I am sports editor Matt Bellinson coming to you after Louisiana Tech's 27-6 loss in the Independence Bowl to the Army Black Knights, finally officially ending Louisiana Tech's 2024 season. The Bulldogs finished 5-8 overall in Sonny Cumbie's third year as head coach. He is now 11-26 as the head coach at Louisiana Tech. It's kind of one of those games where you look at the final score, it's not too surprising. When you talk about what Louisiana Tech lost on the defensive line, Colby Fields wasn't able to play due to injury. Louisiana Tech's left guard Bert Hale, was inactive due to an injury. Obviously their starting kicker, who Drew Henderson had a couple nice field goals, but your starting kicker, is in the portal. I mean, there were so many things working against Louisiana Tech going into this game, and then you add in how good Army is at running the ball. I think a top 3 rushing offense in the entire country. Their quarterback Bryson Daly now officially ends the season with the most rushing touchdowns by a quarterback in FBS history. I think with 32. So you just looked on paper, and I think the final outcome isn't too surprising when you look at Army blowing Louisiana Tech out by 3 touchdowns, but I think what I'm going to first touch on is real quick. I think 10 times out of 10, I think Louisiana Tech had to play this bowl game. I understand, again, it's not ideal circumstances. You had less than 10 days to prepare. It's kind of one of those situations, obviously, with the portal, and then obviously people declaring for the draft. I mean, there were so many things in flux with Louisiana Tech's roster that, a lot of fans were rightfully kind of wondering, like, who's even going to play for Louisiana Tech in this game? Especially on the defensive line. When you talk about losing David Blay, Jaden Gray, Jaden Burnett, and obviously I know Jesse Evans and Michael Clark were a couple guys that were usual starters that were able to come back. But for the most part, you saw Army just flat out dominate the line of scrimmage, and I don't think that was too surprising given what Tech lost. But I think Tech would 100% play this bowl game again. Again, I know it's not ideal circumstances, but I think if you're a program like Louisiana Tech that's been dying for postseason relevance, been dying to get back, frankly, on just a national scale of some kind. Again, I know buried at 8:20 p.m. on a Saturday night on ESPN doesn't exactly scream national relevance, but at the same time, people really care about bowl games. A lot of eyes on these bowl games. During the postseason. People like to bet these games. People like to kind of follow some players that are potentially going to go to the draft and just kind of wrap up some college careers and kind of see how these teams end up. And again, certainly if you're Louisiana Tech, you didn't earn your way here, by your win-loss record. But I think if you're the Bulldogs, I think you 100% have to play just because of giving the young guys opportunities to play on defense. Certainly playing an extra game to kind of see some of the wrinkles that you could continue to work on in the off season. And then, again, I think it's not going to scream national relevance just based on how the game went and the time slot that they were put in. But at the same time, again, people care about bowl games. People kind of probably wanted to know just how good Louisiana Tech's defense was this year. They probably didn't know some of the national numbers, kind of coming into this game. And, certainly they didn't put on a great performance against Army. They allowed, over 300 yards rushing and 5 yards a carry and, were blown out by 3 touchdowns. But I think for a lot of the season, I would send out tweets, and Louisiana Tech football would send out stuff, and it never really felt like the defense got its proper due for how good it was, being a top 12 total defense in the entire country. So that being said, I think Louisiana Tech obviously would have wanted a different outcome, but at the same time, I'm not mad at a team, for asking its players, hey, do you want to go play in a bowl game? The one thing. Well, not the one thing, but among the many things that this program has been lacking, over the past couple seasons. And so I'm not mad at it, especially for these seniors to kind of go out and play one more game, against a really good opponent. And so I think if you're Louisiana Tech, I think 10 times out of 10, you got to take this bowl game. That being said, there certainly were some things to take away. Not super crazy, because again, obviously, when you play a bowl game like this with less than ideal circumstances, and you have so many guys that are about to enter the transfer portal for Louisiana Tech, it's kind of hard to really judge what specifically matters in this game. I was left with 2 things that I think going into 2025 have to be either addressed or expanded upon if you're Louisiana Tech. I think number one with a bullet is clearly, how is this offense going to change under new offensive coordinator Tony Franklin? We heard on Sonny Cumbie's coach's show before the game that, at least according to him, Tony Franklin was in charge of the offensive operation for the bowl game. He was the one calling plays. He was the one in Evan Bullock's ear. He was the one that was in charge of the operation, and so I'm not going to judge the performance too harshly. He had less than 10 days to prepare for this. That being said, he's paid to do this job. He's a grown man. He is responsible for putting together a competent offense, and you walk away with 2 field goals, despite getting inside Army's 14-yard line twice. You come away with 0 touchdowns. So it was definitely a good and bad, I guess, to see that they're trying to add some new wrinkles before these guys are dismissed and potentially leave. But at the same time, you're just left with more questions about what this offense really can be next year. And I think the most prevailing thought for me is how this offense is going to change. Can they actually find a run game? Can they actually produce a balance on this offensive scheme? Now, again, we haven't really talked to Tony Franklin yet, so it's kind of unclear as to what offensive style he wants to bring in his second stint at Louisiana Tech. That being said, I don't really care what offensive style you want to run. If you don't have a run game to lean back on, if you get to Army's 2-yard line and you can't run the ball for 2 yards, I don't really know what type of offense you're really running in 2024. It's certainly not a competent college offense. Obviously Louisiana Tech finishes the season averaging 20 points per game, well outside the top 100 in the country. And that's clearly why Tony Franklin is here. He needs to change the trajectory of where this offense is, because it's an offense that let this defense down this year. Certainly the defense wasn't perfect at times, but I think if you were to look back on the 2024 season, clearly the offense's ineptitude, the red zone struggles, the inability to run the football. Outside of True Edwards, there really was no explosive playmaker, on this offense. And so, again, I think if you look at Louisiana Tech's offense, particularly against Army, who, again, is really stout on the defensive line, who obviously can cause some issues just in terms of the way that they kind of fit the run and some stuff. But if you watch Louisiana Tech this year, you know that this team had no run game whatsoever. Again, I know the plan had to kind of change on a dime. Obviously, with Denario Davenport being injured for most of the season, Marquise Crosby never really got back to true form, and then obviously Amari Wiggins and Amani Givens. They showed some flashes towards the back half of the season, but never really produced anything. I mean, what did Amari finish with as your leading rusher this year? 527 total yards. Amani Givens, 319 yards. Both of them average, less than 41 yards per game. I mean, that's just not a real college offense. And so, again, I'm really curious to see how they attack the run game in the offseason. They certainly have some offensive line pieces that maybe if you're Louisiana Tech, you want to bring back and develop. But maybe Tony Franklin and Sonny Cumbie say, this isn't good enough. We're going to go hard in the portal. We're going to get some veteran offensive linemen, some really big offensive linemen. Sonny Cumbie talked to us in the preseason about how this was the biggest and best offensive line that they've had since they've been here. Well, that didn't really turn out well for them. And so I think offensive line-wise and running back-wise, they need to figure out what is going to happen in the run game, because I don't really care. If Evan Bullock comes back as the starting quarterback of this team next year, that's great. He showed some flashes. He certainly has some accuracy issues to work on. He holds the ball on for way too long, but at the same time, I don't really blame the kid for trying to do too much, because they don't have a run game to lean back on. And so, again, I think if you're Tony Franklin and this offensive staff, you're left leaving this Army game, I think, pretty fittingly. You rush for less than 60 yards in an FBS game. It's just more of the same if you're Louisiana Tech. And so I think if you're the Bulldogs, there are so many issues offensively that they need to fix, but I think first and foremost, you got to attack the line of scrimmage. You got to figure out what is the offensive line combination that's going to allow us to really run the ball effectively, and who are the running backs that are going to run north-south that we can really establish a ground game with. And again, maybe that's Amari Wiggins, maybe it's Amani Givens, and maybe it's someone in the transfer portal. But the bottom line is, the Bulldogs' run offense is pretty weak, and they're going to need to figure out something if this team wants to improve going into 2025. I think one more thought. I think the bottom line is, there's so many questions you can ask about the defense, but I think the bottom line is, can Louisiana Tech truly put a plan of attack together to win? I was listening to Sonny Cumbie's post-game press conference over Zoom. We weren't able to ask questions, unfortunately, over Zoom. I had a lot of questions myself, but those unfortunately were not asked. And so, I was just kind of listening to Sonny Cumbie's answers, about the season, obviously about the game, the senior class, a bunch of topics. And, one thing he kept going back to was he felt like Louisiana Tech, he said it on multiple occasions, was ready to win in 2025. He felt like this was a motivated group. They were going to come back hungry. They were going to come back strong. And 2025 was going to be the year to win. And, I was left thinking, and, you can go back and read some of my stories on the WrestlingDailyLeader.com. it's pretty much the same message that he's been saying the past 3 seasons. Now, again, I know it's the final game of the year. You got to motivate guys. You got to motivate your fan base by saying, "Hey, we're going to win next year. You know, we got the pieces in place. We blah blah blah." But if someone that's watched and studied Louisiana Tech under Sonny Cumbie for 3 seasons now, it's getting to the point where, and clearly, obviously, they were going into 2025 in must-win mode anyway. Um, but I'm so curious and fascinated to what the actual plan is to win games. You know, it's one thing for Sonny Cumbie to say this program is hungry, it's ready to win, the players want to win. You know, they got a taste of the postseason. Now it's time to actually go earn it, and that's great. And I definitely agree with them. But at the same time, you know, and they brought in a new offensive coordinator who, you know, his results remain to be seen. You know, retaining Jeremiah Johnson obviously remains to be seen. I'm struggling to figure out what the actual plan is to get this program off the mat. This program hasn't had a winning season since 2019. This program hasn't actually won a bowl game, you know, since before COVID. And so it's just one of those things where, you know, a lot of people say it's time to win, it's time to get things fixed, but then you watch them, you know, not even compete against Army. You know, you watch them put up 4 field goals and somehow pull out a win against Western Kentucky. You watch them, you know, put up a field goal against Sam Houston, and it's like the back half of your schedule, you just didn't perform that well against, you know, some of these better teams. Again, I know you almost beat Jacksonville State, and they did beat Western Kentucky. That's great. I don't think if you're a Louisiana Tech fan that's what you signed up for. I don't think you signed up to, oh, we beat Western Kentucky, so therefore let's run this whole thing back and we're about to, you know, go over the mountaintop. I think you have a right to be skeptical as to whether or not this is going to improve. And again, certainly I know Army is a really good program. That quarterback for, you know, Bryson Daly, you know, he's going to be an all-time great in college football just in terms of what he was able to do running the football. But I just struggle to figure out where things are going to get better, because you look at the defense. This was a top 12 unit this year, and you still missed out on a bowl game by earning it in the regular season. You know, this offense for 3 years now has rotated quarterbacks, rotated offensive linemen, has brought in new skill players, and has not produced at a high enough level. And clearly that's why Tony Franklin is here. Maybe he gets things changed. But as we sit here today after this bowl loss, I'm just left wondering, can this program really get off the mat and start to win? Because clearly 2025 is a make or break year for Sonny Cumbie. If he does not make a bowl game, I would assume he is fired. You know, talking to Ryan Ivey, you know, after the regular season, he made it very clear that making a postseason berth, you know, really contending for Conference USA are the priorities for this coaching staff. And so, again, a lot of it hinges on what Tony Franklin does as the new offensive play caller. You know, again, we have yet to see, you know, that truly in action, truly with a full, you know, game preparation in place. But as I sit here today, I just struggle to figure out, can this defense really be this good again this year? And if it's not, which you would imagine college football, there's a lot of variance. There's going to be injuries. There's going to be players leave. There's going to be coaches leave. I just wonder, okay, if this defense, you know, drops to like 35th or maybe 30th in total defense, and your offense marginally improves, like, that doesn't scream a lot of success to me. That doesn't scream that this team is going to contend for much. And so I think there has to be a ton of holistic change at the top of Louisiana Tech football. I think they have to understand, you know, in the offseason strength and conditioning, they have to understand practice preparation better. Sonny Cumbie has said all this. And so there are just so many questions that, you know, we don't have time to get into this episode, but I was left this bowl game thinking, what is the actual plan to success in 2025, and who's going to be here, you know, player-wise, to get that done? Because the transfer portal has really not been kind to Louisiana Tech at this point. They brought in a couple nice players here and there, but for the most part, there haven't really been a ton of game changers, a ton of wow, like we got this guy out of the transfer portal. He just was dynamic and just changed our fortunes. You know, certainly again, I think Colby Fields a couple years ago was an example of a guy that really paid off for them. Zach Zymos at linebacker certainly paid off. But on the offensive side, who's really stood out as far as like a transfer that's just like, wow. I mean, without him, I mean, this offense was just, I mean, we wouldn't have been the same without this guy. And so I think they have to just take a real hard look at attacking the transfer portal better, developing their high school talent. Again, I know I'm rambling, but there's so many things when you talk about, hey, it's time to win at Louisiana Tech. Well, that's great to say, but you have so many things to fix that I think you have a right to be skeptical as to whether or not it's going to be fixed now in year 4 of this coaching regime. And again, a lot of it hinges on Tony Franklin as offensive coordinator. And we're going to see. We're going to see if he can actually bring different results to this team, and if he's going to actually change something. Because the bottom line is Louisiana Tech fans deserve better, and clearly this program wants better, and it's looking for its first winning season since 2019. And so that's this coaching staff's responsibility. That's what they're paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, to do. And so again, that's going to be my overall thoughts. After this bowl game, again, there's really not much to take away. Some young guys made some plays. Again, their roles next season are still to be determined. So I'm not going to make any grand conclusions about things. But the bottom line is Louisiana Tech finishes the 2024 season 5-8 overall. They end Sonny Cumbie's third year with a third losing season. They go into 2025 in a must-win mode. And so I'm going to be curious to see how that all plays out. We're hoping to talk to Tony Franklin here in the next week or so. So I'm really curious to see kind of what he has to say about why he came back to Louisiana Tech, his offensive scheme, so many questions. But for now, I really appreciate you guys following along for the 2024 season. That's going to do it for this edition of Tech in 10. From the Rustin Data Leader, I'm sports editor Matt Bellinson saying thanks for listening. Have a good one.